With the help of Hashem, we are learning Rosh Hashana Daf Yud Dalid. We're going to have today Yud Dalid and tomorrow Tezvav, two more dafim about the laws of agriculture or laws of Zeroyim. As we learned yesterday on Daf Yud Gimel, that we found a scriptural source that when it comes to grains, and we also included in that olives and grapes, the determining factor which will assign that product to a specific year has to do with, did it already mature a third or not? And as we spoke out, aside of the last topic we learned about yesterday, which is how do we make an assignment when it comes to legumes, aside of that, what we learned in the Mishnah, vegetables, the assignment has to do from when did you pick it. When it comes to fruits, not olive and grapes, it has to do with when it had its chanata, which means when either it bloomed or when did it emerge on the tree, when did it bud, different ways of defining chanata. We didn't yet quote a source for that. And we're going to begin today learning both the source for vegetables that will follow the picking, for fruits, again, other than olives and grapes, that it follows chanata. Where do we get that from? We will actually see a machloikis, a nuanced argument, tanoim, between Rabbi Yossi Haglili and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yossi Haglili says that the defining characteristic of vegetables is that they continuously grow from the water that's falling. So even though they began to develop from the waters of last year, once we established that the year for vegetables is the first day of Tishrei, so if something was planted and it began to grow before Tishrei, it needed the waters from the prior year, it also continuously needs the waters from the current year or from the next year. Unlike a tree, that the waters, the rainwaters in Eretz Yisrael, Cheshvan, Kislev, the majority of the rainwaters go into the tree. It creates the sap of the tree. Once the tree has its sap, then the fruit, from when it emerges until when it's ready to be picked, is really getting its nourishment from the sap, which already got its nourishment from the waters of the last year. That's going to be the key over here. So that's why, as we'll see, grain, once it developed a third, it already got the nourishment from the waters. It's all about what waters does it primarily need for it to be able to develop what it needs to develop. And the third is it got the majority of the water that it needed. By the tree, it's going to get the majority once the sap is in the tree, which happens when the tree begins to emerge fruits, which is Echad B'Shvat or Tu B'Shvat, and vegetables continuously need waters. But here again, the nuance, according to Rabbi Akiva, the wording is that vegetables grow from the waters of the new year as well. And Rabbi Akiva will hold that vegetables requires irrigation. It does not live off, does not develop only with rainwaters, which is why it continuously needs waters. And we'll see a nuanced nafkamina between Rabbi Yossi Haglili and Rabbi Akiva regarding certain scenarios. We're going to focus on the ending of the Mishnah today, because on Daf Tezayin, we're beginning a second Mishnah. And we're going to come back completely to Rosh Hashana topics. But again, today, tomorrow, Zeroyim, the last din in the Mishnah is Be'echad B'Shvat or Tu B'Shvat as Rosh Hashana Le'ilon. And the Gemara is going to tell us a story of the great Tana Rabbi Akiva, that he himself picked a sroigim off an esrog tree. He picked it on the first day of Shvat. We are going from the second year to the third year. And as we just learned that the types of maasros change. On the second year, you give Meiser Rishon and Meiser Sheni. On the third year, you give Meiser Rishon and Meiser Ani. And Rabbi Akiva gave both Meiser Sheni and Meiser Ani. Oh my God. We'll see how he did that. Because he didn't know whether Echad B'Shvat is already the new year. That's what it sounds like. So if Echad B'Shvat is like B'Shamayim, so then it's already the new year, the next year, the third year, or whether Echad B'Shvat is still part of the prior year. So that's one way of understanding his doubt, even though Rabbi Akiva would not know, and we don't paskin like Rabbi Beisilal Beishamai L'chumra. We don't do that. But there is another machloikus, which between other Tanoim, whether an esrog is unique, wow, and maybe machloikus Tanoim, that as far as maasros is concerned, the esrog is like a vegetable. It doesn't matter when it emerged, it matters when you picked it. And all connected to the waters. And as we'll see at the end, that an esrog tree, sure, develops from the sap, Now, the sap in the tree comes in Israel from the rainwaters that fell from Cheshvan until Shvat. After that, the sap is already there. What's unique about an esrog, and we had this in the Sechta Sukkah, that is hadar le'ilan. It's the only fruit that not only is able to stay on the tree the entire year, and it can be on a tree for many years. It doesn't get over matured, but it benefits from being on the tree. Every season adds something to the esrog. It's hadar be'ilan mishana l'shana. The esrog gets nourishment, develops from the sap, and it also develops from the new rainwaters. It's all going to be connected to the rainwaters. Ad kedei kach, there's going to be a havamina that for an esrog, when it comes to maestris, according to Rabbi Gamliel, the Tana that says that an esrog for maestris, it goes like a vegetable, like depending when you pick it, maybe the Rosh Hashana will be echad b'tishrei, but we'll see that it's not so. And I just want to reiterate one point, not to get confused. There are two topics that we have to put together, but they're separate topics. What we are discussing right now is when you want to place the assignment, whether it is yesterday, the grain, today it's going to be vegetables and fruits, whether it's picking, a third, emerging. That's the question. There's another question. When did it happen? When was it picked? When did it emerge? So when it comes to grains, when it comes to vegetables, clearly Rosh Hashana is echad b'tishrei. So if the criteria is when did you pick it? Did you pick it before echad b'tishrei or after echad b'tishrei? The topic about a tree, right, whether it's echad b'shvat or tu b'shvat, the topic about a tree is that it has to do with chanata. It's whether the chanata happened before Shvat or after Shvat, not before echad b'tishrei or after Tishrei. So they have different Rosh Hashanahs. So don't get confused by mixing one case with the other. Let's start learning inside. Chevra, Daf Yud Daled. We left off 11 lines from the top of the Amid. Tanya Rabbi Yosi Haglili Omer. It's beautiful. Now that we already established that when it comes to Tvua and to olives and to grapes, and we have a source from Scripture, it has to do with the shlish. That will determine the year of its assignment. So now let's move on to vegetables. Let's move on to fruits. When it says in Parshas Re'eh, the pasuk actually begins by writing the words Chag Hasukos Tasel Chashivas Yamim. Make it with your gatherings from the threshing floor and the wine press. And if you remember, this is the pasuk that we used in Masechta Sukkah, from where we learn the rules about the schach. What's the pshat is, make sukkahs not only during the time of, make the sukkah, make the schach from that which you gather from the goyden and the yaakov. That's one limud that we had in Masechta Sukkah. Now we're learning a whole different limud. Now we are comparing all items that grow from the ground. They all have to have a certain rule similar to that which is on the threshing floor, which is tfuah, and that which is in your wine vats, which is grapes. And we already learned yesterday, they go together. The grain, the grapes, and the olives, they follow shlish. Now, ma goyron v'yakef. How are they unique? Miyuchadim. You know, I'll tell you how they are unique. Shigedelim almei shana sha'avra. That once, as we learned, when they reach a third of their growth, which is what we're looking for, once they developed a third, they already used the rainwaters that they needed. And that's why, that's the third. Now, by them, it's echad b'tishrei. So if the rainwaters fell before echad b'tishrei and it hit a third before echad b'tishrei, since it already got its rainwaters from before Tishrei, that's why umisasrin l'shana sha'avra. That's why we go after the prior year, even though from a third until fully developed, it grew a lot more, and it grew a lot more in the next year after Echad B'Tishrei. I don't care. It has to do because once it reached a third, it already used up the waters. So there, from that we learn af koil shegedelim al mei shana sha'avra. Anything else that its main growth is from the years that already fell. Now, what are we talking about, my friends? We're speaking about fruits. We're speaking about fruits other than olives and grapes. Like we mentioned, they grow from the sap in the tree. Now, I know by fruits, the Rosh Hashana is Shvat. I know that. But that's not the Nakuda. When we're saying it's about Chanata, why about Chanata? Because by the time it begins to emerge on the tree, it already has most of the liquids it needs to fully develop, even though it's not fully developed. And those rains fell before it emerged. So it goes from what rains is it getting its life from. Therefore, misasrin l'shana sha'avra. So that already explains the third by grain, which is the primary nourishment is from the rains until then. The chanata stage, the emerging stage of a fruit, by then it already has the main rain nourishment that it needs. That explains now the chanata of Shvat, and that also explains the vegetables. Vegetables is not that way. Yatsu Yirakois, that excludes vegetables. Since Shigedelim al Meishana Haba, it doesn't only grow from the rain that fell in the past, it also grows from the rain in the past. But it's not, it already has enough lachluchias, it has enough moisture, it's good to go. It doesn't go that way. It needs rain. And until you pick it, when it rains, that rain will further develop the vegetable. So therefore, umisasrin l'shana haba. Rabbi Akiva Oimer, it's very similar, but there's a nuance of a difference. That ba'aspecha migarnecha umiyekvecha, I mean, the ikid is the same. The fact that they both share the same drasha, that aside of the pshat of the pasuk and the eight, that schach should be made from that which is on the threshing floor, which is geduli karka, that's not mechubal karka, that's not makabel tuma. No, we are comparing all of produce together. Everything that grows, benegea, what benegea, these dinim. To what year do you assign it? Ma goyden v'yekev miyuchadim shgedelim al roiv mayim. Goyden v'yekev, goyden means grains. Yaakov means grapes. They don't need to have human irrigation. The rainwater that falls by nature, unless God forbid there's a drought, is enough for it to grow. That's called roiv mayim. You know, roiv literally means the majority. It means it only needs rainwater. It doesn't need arid irrigation. Both of them share, therefore, the same rule. In other words, fruits which are like Goyden v'Yekev have the same rule, and that is misasrin l'shana sha'avra. They are both tied based on the previous year. Again, even though the previous year of grain is before Rosh Hashana, the previous year by fruits is before Shvat. Doesn't matter; it's the same nekudah. You don't count the new year because it really doesn't need the rain. That's fruits, things that only need rainwater, also misasrin l'shana sha'avra. And what does that exclude? Yatsu Yirakos, that excludes vegetables. What's unique about vegetables? Shigedelim al kol mayim. It needs rainwater. It also needs added water. And by the way, it needs added water all the way until the end. These two things are very similar. And therefore, you don't say that since it reached a certain stage, that's it. It's assigned to that year. No, it needs water until the end. It needs human irrigation. So when did it grow? Until when you picked it. And therefore, misasrin l'shana haba.
So what's the difference between
My benayu? The Gemara is asking. The Gemara knew Yakir is going to come, so just give you in some nachas. So what's the difference? There is a difference. Amar Ababo. Now, guys, here you have to hold your hat because the Gemara is going to say something, and there's a machlokes how to explain the my benayu. We're going to only say one. Not we're going to get all fadrei. My benayu. This is the example. There's a certain type of onion that's called bitzalim hasorisim, unique onions. Either, normally onions, they sprout greens. It's like an onion that can't have children. There are no greens to it. They're actually very small onions. They were called bitzalim sorisim and pul hamitzri. And Egyptian means, now guys, it's very good that we made clear when we learned pul hamitzri, that pul hamitzri that we learned about yesterday was this Egyptian bean that was planted for seeds, which is why yesterday we put it in the category of legumes, because it was planted for seeds. If you planted the same pul hamitzri for its pods, it's considered a vegetable. And here it's a vegetable. These are two vegetables. The Tanach, now again, what Gemara will explain. As we learned in Shvi'is, it was relatively common that that people who wanted them to be hard, probably if you were growing them to preserve them, I'm just assuming. Again, moisture is geschmack when it's fresh, but it also speeds up its demise. It becomes ruined quickly. But for whatever reason, it was relatively common that people did not give it any water 30 days before Rosh Hashana, which made it smaller and harder. If this is what happened, misasrin l'sha'avar umatarim b'shviz, even though you picked it after Rosh Hashana, Yakir, you pick, and what's the rule by vegetables? When did you pick it? You picked it after Rosh Hashana. In this case, if you did not give it water, it's counted in the past year. And if, for example, you're going from the 6th year to the 7th year, now there are many restrictions on that which grows on the 7th year. Even though you picked it on the 7th year, since you did not irrigate it for 30 days before Rosh Hashana, it's not 7th year. And therefore, umutarim b'shviz, because it's a product of the 6th year. Now, the imlav, if you did not withhold water from either these unique types of onions and that type of Egyptian bean, sometimes you withheld. If you didn't, then it's a normal vegetable. Then, for example, if you picked it on the Shemitah year, it's asurim b'shviz. If you picked it not on the Shemitah year, nothing has to be tied. But if you picked it on the 9th year, let's say, then umisasrin, it's based on the 9th year. Again, whether it's as we explained, Meiser Sheni, Meiser Ani. Now, what the Gemara is trying to say is this Mishnah does not follow both Rabbi Yosef Glili and Rabbi Akiva. The nuance difference will be that this Mishnah will only be according to one. Which one? A machloikes here in Rashi. But let's read the first shita. So look inside Rashi, the second line, not the second widest line, the second line under the Gemara. The first approach of Rashi. That solves that our Mishnah that we just quoted can only follow Rabbi Yosef Glili. And let's read the words. Rabbi Yossi Haglili Islay Ha Masnisan. He will agree with, he will be either the author of, or Rebbe wrote it only according to him. That what? Kiven the mana mayim, where's the bach? Kiven the mana mehen mayim lamed yoim, lifnei Rosh Hashana. So the de facto nimtzu, it comes out that gedelim almei shana sha'avra has to do with the poil, which water did it get nourishment from? If a vegetable got water only from the mayim of the Shana Sha'avra, then it's like grain. However, according to Rabbi Akiva, what does Rabbi Akiva say? That what makes vegetables different than grain? Because Gidelim al kol mayim, because it's a product, not Yakir, this product. Vegetables need continuous irrigation. This also needs continuous irrigation. The fact that you withheld water, and if it rained, you didn't even allow the rain to go on it, you changed it. It's harder than it would have been in nature. But it does. But it's a product that needs constant water. Still needs constant water. If it's about does it need constant water, then it should make no nafkamina whether this individual product got constant water. That's the first approach on Rashi. And then Rashi writes later on an opposite explanation, but let's leave it at that. The Nakuda, guys, one thing is good for the way we're learning. Let's just get the concept that it's amazing. The Seder is amazing. We found a source for grain and olives and grapes. It's about a shlish. And now we're going to Sfara. Why a shlish? The Torah doesn't say. The Chazal said it's a shlish. Has to do with which waters is it living off. And just like they know that a shlish, it got all the waters that it needed. It can use more, but its primary koyach came from the waters. So when did those waters fall? Before it's Rosh Hashana, the past year. Same thing with fruits. That by Shvat time, since the sap in the trees are already filled from the waters that fell until Shvat. So even though you're going to pick it much later, doesn't need that rainwater. Primarily, it already has the koyach that it needs from the sap. Again, this is Shvat, that's Tishrei. And fakert in vegetables, it needs the waters that fell yesterday. It needs the water today. It needs the water tomorrow. It's constantly living off the current waters. So until when you pick it, it's still getting its nourishment from those waters. It's amazing. It has to do not with the earth, but with the water. Now, all of this will, I'm just going to the end, the whole next daf. Esrog will be unique. On one hand, an esrog, when it begins to have chanata, it has the tree has the sap that it needs. The tree has the sap that it needs. But the esrog still benefits from the new waters as well, which is why perhaps esrog is different. Perhaps. But let's begin. Okay. So, be'echad b'shvat Rosh Hashana le'ilan, We're up to it, guys. I know that again on Daf Tez Zayin, on top, we're beginning a new Mishnah. Mamish Rosh Hashana, about the judgment of the world, Freilach. Today and tomorrow is Zroim. But we're learning Zroim because the last thing in the Mishnah was the fourth Rosh Hashana. And the fourth Rosh Hashana, Machlekes Beishamai and Beisilo. Let me just speak out right now what the Rebbe says, which is a phenomenal general approach to all arguments between Beishamai and Beisilo, that Beishamai looks at things as they are B'koyach. Once the potential is there, Beishamai already sees it. Beisilo needs for things to materialize. Let's use the words right now. The sap that the tree needs to produce fruits is in the tree of Rosh Chodesh Shvat. But the Chanata, most fruits only emerge to Bishvat. So do you look at that which is needed for the fruits, or do you need to have at least a little bit of a fruit? And as we will see, we know, Beishamai Echad B'Shvat, Beisilo Tu B'Shvat. We will see that the great Rabbi Akiva didn't know who said what. He didn't know who said what. Later on, we accepted what we just said right now, that was their machlokes. And because of that, listen to the story. So says the Gemara. So again, my Tama, why Shvat? No, it's until now we were speaking about Chanata. But aside of it being Chanata and not Shlish and not Lekita, there's another date for Rosh Hashana. Why is it another date? So it's all aligned. So Amar Rabbi Lazar, Amar Rabbi Ishia, Choyul v'yatzu roiv gishmei shana. Since by Shvat, the majority of the rains already fell, and I want you to know, for people who actually make the cheshbonos, this only holds according to Beis Hillel. You have to know exactly when it begins. Yud Zayin Shvat, there's dates in Halacha, we'll see in Tainus, when the rains fall in Eretz Yisrael, to say that the majority of the rainy season passed. It didn't pass by Rosh Chodesh Shvat, but this is explaining basically by Tu B'Shvat, the majority of the rain seasons already fell. Yet the winter season, we'll speak more about the seasons later, which is called Tkufas Teves. The majority of that season did not pass yet. Now, by the way, this latter statement is going in the opposite direction. In other words, if we want for something at least to pass in the majority, so if by Tu B'Shvat the majority of winter would have passed, so therefore it goes by the Roiv. Adayin Roiv Hatkufa B'Bachutz. If the majority of, if we care about the winter season, which we don't, but if we would have cared, so then it should have been the opposite. If the majority of the winter is still ahead, and somehow Rosh Hashana is after winter, or at least after the majority of the winter, then this is a question on why Tu B'Shvat. And the Gemara says, Taka, Maika Amar, what are you saying? The second point is the opposite. So the Gemara says, no. What Rabbi Lazar, Amar Rabbi Oishia said was Taka the opposite. They acknowledged. They said, even though the majority of the season of winter, that we call the season of Teves, did not yet pass, was if the Rosh Hashana would have to do with seasons, then what's the magic in Tu B'Shvat? Or what's the magic in Echad B'Shvat? It would not have been. But it's not about the seasons. It's about rain. It's all about rain because things which grow needs water. And everything going back to the Tvuah, that a third of Tvuah already got its primary nourishment. So by trees, since the Yatsu Roiv Gishmei Shanam, it's the passage of most of the rainy season is behind us. That's a lot more significant when we are going to determine when is the Rosh Hashana. I don't care about the seasons. I care about the rain. And I don't need to have all the rain. I don't need to have all the rain because the Roiv, the majority of the nourishment that the fruits will come from, will be from the sap. The sap is there. The sap is there. Okay. Go on. Now, Tana Rabbanim, we looked at Abraisa, Maisa ben Rabbi Akiva. Shelikoid esrog, that he picked. Now, one esrog won't fit the poil because when you give maisras, if you pick only one esrog, it's like arai. It means he picked esrogim from one esrog tree. So he had a basket of esrogim and he had a tithe. And what day we know it was be'echad b'shvat. He picked it on echad b'shvat. Now, according to Beis Hillel, echad b'shvat still belongs to the past year. This story, my friends, happened between the second year and the third year of the seventh cycle. What's the difference? Very simple. If it's considered a product of the second year, truma, ma'aser rishon, regardless, ma'aser sheni. If it's considered like Beis Shammai, echad b'shvat, We're speaking about picking. We're not even speaking about chanata. We'll get to that on Amud Beis. But if we're going to consider this already the new year, Rosh Hashana is already Echad B'Shvat, not Echad B'Tishrei, for a tree, for fruit. So it's the third year. So he had a doubt whether you have to give Meiser Sheni or Meiser Ani. And he gave both. The Noag Bo Shnei Isurim. He gave both Meisers. Now, there's so many technical challenges. Number one, we keep on repeating. When you give Truma, you give Truma first, you take off 2%. Meiser Rishon, 10% is not from what you had originally. If you have 100 apples, Meiser Rishon will never be 10. You know why? Because you give 2 apples to a Kohen. You have 98 apples, it's 9.8. Let me go further. Meiser Sheni is from what remained. So you have to explain, when he took off 2 Meisers, how did he do that? Because if he took off Meiser Sheni and then he took off Meiser Ani from what remained, that's wrong, because if he was not obligated to give Meiser Sheni, there has to be more Meiser Ani. So the last Tosfos in the Amud explains what he did. He's Truma, Meiser Rishon, regardless. What was his doubt? Whether Sheni or Ani. He took off Meiser Sheni. He redeemed the Meiser Sheni on money. That's now what remained should have been his. He gave that to the Ani. That's his chap. Look inside the Tosfos. Then it wouldn't have been perfect. What did Rabbi Akiva do? The first Meiser after Meiser Rishon was from Meiser Sheni, and he redeemed it, and he gave those fruits, those esrogim he gave to the Aniyim. Okay. Daf Yud Daled. This is all what Rabbi Akiva did. And the Tanach says, now everyone knew that this is what happened. This Braisa was written after the story. Why did he do it? The Tana is explaining. And everyone is going to jump. What are you talking about, guys? Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel are only speaking about the date of Rosh Hashana, but when it comes to a tree, we are learning it's not connected to picking. We're going to get to that in a moment. So yeah, if you put that aside, it's easy. Yeah, he didn't know. He didn't know, so he was machmer like both. Says Rabbi Yossi, but Rabbi Yehuda Omer, it has nothing to do with Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. The story was that Rabbi Akiva picked esrogim. Oh, it must be, now we do find the machloikes Tanoim, Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer, like we spoke out in the introduction, that Rabban Gamliel argues that for one area of halacha, an esrik is like a vegetable, which is, if you have to determine what year of Maisris are you in, you don't go after the Chanata, it's emerging on the tree, you go after when you picked it. Oh. Elo, Minog, Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Eliezer, Ditnan, no, it's Basa Lakita or Basa Chanata. People say, what are you talking about? Only vegetables is Lakita. No, here we go. We have a Mishnah. Esroig, everyone holds that an esrog follows all of the rules of a tree for the following 3. But as far it's compared to a yarig in one halacha. And the Mishnah explains. What does la'arla mean? You want to know what year of Arla are you in? Let me all go back to Shvat. Let's go to Shvat. Don't confuse. That's the way most of the Shoinim learn. It's all about Tu B'Shvat, Beis Hillel. If the Chanata happened before Tu B'Shvat, so it's in the earlier year of Arla. Let's say you're going from the 3rd year to the 4th year. After you leave the 3rd year, it's no longer Arla. Even if it is in Eretz Yisrael, it's only Netanavoy. You can take it to Yerushalayim. What happens if this esrog was picked after Tu B'Shvat? So the din is no. If the Chanata happened before Tu B'Shvat, then it's still in the 3rd year. Like every other tree that we follow the Chanata, we follow when did it begin to bud. We don't care when you pick it, because if you got it. If you would look when you picked it, if you picked it in the after Tu B'Shvat, it should be from the 4th year. We don't say that. Same thing with the Revoy. No, Revoy means that in Eretz Yisrael, even though it's not Arla on the 4th year, but you can't just eat it. It's like Meiser Sheni. But let's say again, it emerged on the tree. The Chanata happened before Tu B'Shvat. You picked it after Tu B'Shvat. We don't say I picked it and therefore it's already completely Vashana HaChamishis. It's yours. It's not mine yet. It's not mine. It's after the Chanata. Ul Shvi is Same thing. Very important. Now, guys, Shemitah, here's the confusion. Shemitah is connected to Echad B'Tishrei. But let me go something. What happens if I picked it on the Shemitah year? It's not Shemitah product. If the Chanota happened before Tu B'Shvat, and that's common by an esrog, it stays on the tree a long time. People leave it right before Sukkot. So even though you picked it on the 7th year, if it would be like vegetables, then when did you pick it? I don't care when I picked it. If it emerged on the tree before Tu B'Shvat, it's not a Shemitah year. If it emerged on the tree before Echad B'Tishrei, for Shemitah goes Tishrei, Danny. That's the only confusion. Other than that, it's always Shvat. That's how we're going to learn. So in other words, what we care about is Chanata. But according to Rabban Gamliel, esrog unique is Uliyarik B'derech Echad. It's like a vegetable, which means Shebeshas Likitosoi Isuroi. Wow, Divrei Rabban Gamliel. So let me say like this. This is all Tu B'Shvat. If it emerged on the tree on the second year, and you picked it on the 3rd year, Ma'aser Ani, not Ma'aser Sheni. Always using Tu B'Shvat, not using Echad B'Tishrei. But the point is that when you want to know what year of Ma'aser does it belong to, it's when you pick it. Now, again, when is the Rosh Hashana? I know that for vegetables, it's Echad B'Tishrei. For Tvuah, it's Echad B'Tishrei. There's going to be a Havamina. We'll learn at the end of the Amid that according to Rab Gamliel, just to be consistent, he also means it's Echad B'Tishrei. It's not what he means. Rosh Hashana is B'Shvat. But still, we follow when you picked it. Did you pick it before Shvat or after Shvat? L'Bei Shammai before Echad B'Shvat, after Echad B'Shvat, L'Bei Hillel before Tu B'Shvat, after Tu B'Shvat. And that's only Rabbi Gamliel. Now, Rabbi Eliezer says, what are you talking about? An esrog is a fruit tree. It's like any other fruits. And by the way, there are exceptions by fruits. We already learned, right? A grape and an olive is the exception already. It has to do not with chanata. It has to do with shlish. But anyways, Rabbi Eliezer esrog shavel ilan l'chol davar. So now it's gavaldik. So now says Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. You know why Rabbi Akiva separated two maasros? Because he picked it on Echad B'Shvat. Now here's the problem. If you picked it by Echad B'Shvat, it's mashma that Rabbi Gamliel is holding that Rabbi Akiva for sure followed Rabbi Beis Shammai, which is a problem. He just didn't know whether it's after Chanot or after Lakita. We're going to get to that question in a moment. But the point is, doubt was that if you would have followed the esrog like all other fruits, the Chanota happened before, 2nd year. If you're going to follow the sheet of Rabban Gamliel, that for the one din of Maasros, what year are you up to? You follow when you picked it. He picked it in the later year. That was his doubt. And we're going to come back to Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda, but first the Gemara now is going to challenge the Tanakama's understanding of his doubt. And the only doubt, the challenge was, do you follow Beis Shammai or Beis Hillel? He didn't know, so he was machmer. And you can't do that. You can't be machmer like both. You cannot be machmer like both. Like you can be maker like both. You have to pick a shita and go with the shita all the way. Frek the Gemara, umi, this is on the Tanakama, umi avdin and ketrei chumra, are you b'chlal allowed to follow a double chumra? V'hatanya, lo'olam halacha kedivrei Beis Hillel. This lo'olam, if you remember, guys, on Eruv and Daf Yud Gimel, the Gemara tells us about a period of time where we were going back and forth. Do we follow Beis Hillel? Do we follow Beis Shammai? Everywhere. Ultimately, a baskol came out from the heavens and it said, Eilu ve'eilu divrei Elokim chayim, but halacha kedivrei Beis Hillel. Once the baskol came out, is we're not even allowed to follow Beis Shammai. Even though we have Rabbi Eliezer Shamuti, we'll leave that alone. This statement of the Braisa was made before the baskol. Like this, no one is going to be disturbed. So really, even before the baskol came out, we knew the general rule, we follow majority, we should follow Beis Hillel, but and if you want to do Kedivir Beis Hillel, oisa. Before the baskol, there was still an option to pick and choose. But the point the Braisa wants to make is this. For you to go ahead and to say, you know what I'm going to do? I'm always going to follow the one that was more lenient, that you're not allowed to do. To say that I'll always follow the Kulei of Beis Shammai, Umi Kula Beis Hillel. Whoever does that is called a Rasha. And on the other hand, You're going to say, I'll be a tzaddik, I'll do the chumras. You're not allowed to do that. Don't think this, you're not a tzaddik. The fool goes in the darkness. In other words, things that come from Beishamai and Beisilel, especially the way that Eb explains, that all of the arguments are connected. B'koyach or b'poyel works. Remember, by Chanukah, do you like the first night 1 Hillel, Beisilel, or do you like the first night 8 Beishamai? So the Rebbe explains Gavaldik because the oil that was in the first night, B'koyach, how much koyach did it have on the first night? LeBeishamai, 8 nights. Didn't burn yet for 8 nights. But since we know that they only had tar oil 8 days later, so it ended up burning for 8 nights. So the biggest B'koyach miracle oil was the first night. The first night you burn 8. All the arguments is B'koyach B'poyel. So if you follow the actual, follow Beisilel. If you follow the potential, follow Beishamai. You can be machmar like both. Ela ike Beishamai, bikuleim u bechumreim, ike Beisilel bikuleim bechumreim. And by the way, that's the way we always do it. Right? The Ashkenazim, we follow the Ramah. The Sfardim follow the Mechaber. No one should go ahead and say, I'll be a tzaddik. I'll follow wherever the Ramah's machmer, wherever the Mach. Don't do that. So how can Rabbi Akiva go ahead and follow both chumras? Let him pick a side. Great question. Answers the Gemara that Rabbi Akiva, Gemara is tapakle. Gemara means what he learned from his teachers. Now don't forget, Rabbi Akiva was the pillar of the whole Torah Shabbal Peh. All of the Torah Shabbal Peh that we have came through Rabbi Akiva. Because that was the time that, especially after his Talmidim got killed, and there was so much Roman persecution then, they actually killed him terribly, Al Kiddush Hashem, at the end. He was the man. So if he forgot something, he forgot this. He forgot this machlokas. He knew that one says Echad B'Shvat, one says Tu B'Shvat. He didn't remember who said what. Now all of this obviously has to be explained, especially following the Rebbe's biur. If it's B'Koyach or B'Poyel, why was he unable to extrapolate who said what? But let's leave it alone right now. He didn't know. Or Amru, because it's Beis Hillel. Ibetu B'Shvat Amru. Rabbi Akiva follows Beis Hillel. He did not remember what Beis Hillel says. And because of that, according to the Tanach, he gave both Meiser Sheni and Meiser Ani the way Tosfos explains. Now let's go further. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda Oimer. The issue wasn't Echad B'Shvat or Tu B'Shvat. It's irrelevant. By the way, irrelevant, but we have to follow Beis Hillel. We'll get to that. The question was, he picked it the Echad B'Shvat. So the reason why he thought maybe it's the new year, Meiser Ani, is because he picked it later. But by a esreg has to do with Chanata. That's the machloikas. Ela minag Rabban Gamliel v'Rabbi Eliezer nagba. Asks the Gemara, okay, but if he wants to assign the esrog to the later year, to the third year, Rabban Gamliel, Mele, if he would have picked it on Tu B'Shvat, which is the Rosh Hashana, so he picked it in the new year. Again, in the new year, we're saying that the Maisris, as we'll see clear in the Gemara in a moment, even according to Rabban Gamliel, that you follow the picking by an esrog, but when is the Rosh Hashana? At the end, it's always going to be Tu B'Shvat, according to Beis Hillel. But the Echad B'Shvat, he picked it on Echad B'Shvat. Means, you get it, kid. Even if he would follow Rabban Gamliel, it goes when you picked it. So what? He picked it before Rosh Hashana. If Rosh Hashana is Tu B'Shvat, so you're saying, maybe Rabban Gamliel, but the Echad B'Shvat ke Beishamai noagba. How can that be? So Amar Rabbi Chanina v'Temer Rabbi Chananya, that it was not recorded properly. Really, what happened was the esrog emerged before Tu B'Shvat. But you know which Tu B'Shvat? It emerged before last year's Tu B'Shvat. Amazing. So last Tu B'Shvat is the Rosh Hashana. The Chanota happened before last year's Tu B'Shvat. Any time that Rabbi Akiva would have picked it after Tu B'Shvat, since we're saying he had a doubt whether we paskin like Rabban Gamliel, whether we paskin like Rabbi Eliezer, he would have taken off 2 maisvos. That could have happened Tu B'Shvat, that could have happened Tezayin Shvat, that could have happened Rosh Chodesh, other. It happened to be that he only picked it almost a year later. So when you see Echad B'Shvat, you think, Echad B'Shvat. Echad B'Shvat we don't care about. The Chanata was before last year's Tu B'Shvat. Last year's Tu B'Shvat, before last year's Tu B'Shvat was the second year. After Tu B'Shvat of last year, we are in the third year. The third year goes until this year's Tu B'Shvat. He picked it before the new Tu B'Shvat. Ubedinu, and therefore, that afilu koidim lochein, even if he would have picked it way before he did it. You understand? Even if he would have picked it almost a year prior, if he would have picked it already from last year's Tu B'Shvat, he would have had the same doubt. It happened to be that he only picked it this year's Tu B'Shvat, this year's Rosh Hashana. That's one way out. And Ravina Amar, Ravina has a different verse. He says, Kroich v'tanei. Rabbi Yossi, but Rabbi Yehuda doesn't only argue with the Tanakama's interpretation of that story by saying he didn't know whether Kibesil or Kibeshamai, or he didn't know what Besilil says. He also says your dates are wrong. Lo yechad b'shvat hoya, elo tu b'shvat hoya. And v'lo minig b'shama Besilil nagba. Because since, according to him, everyone knows that Besilil is the one that says tu b'shvat. And we follow Besilil, and even before the Bas called, you're not allowed to pick Kechura B'Shamai, Kechura Besilil. Ela minag Rabban Gamliel, but Eliezer Noag. Nekuda. It's so beautiful, so systematic. The only doubt we're going to go from today until Daf Tezvav, I'll just say it by heart, is that what we had consistent, which is good, is that there are two topics that we're not convoluting. Number one is how much of the product needs to grow for you to determine the year assignment. Shlish, Chanota, Lekita, and then yesterday the legumes, Zozain Hashrasha, or the Gemar Peri. And then there's something else. What's the date? What's the date? So we also were consistent that other than the trees, other than the Elon, than the fruits, Echad B'Tishrei. For the fruits, say Shvat, without going to the B'Sham Beisil. There is a Havamina here, just one Havamina, that according to Rabbi Gamliel, that says that the Esrik, for the Maisle year, it goes after you pick it. There was a Havamina that there we should go after Echad B'Tishrei. And we'll see, and the Gemara is going to say it's not correct. Let's go read it inside. To find the place, I'm sorry. Oh, says the Gemara, Omar Rabba Barafuna, Hashta do Omar. Now that we brought down this sheet of the Tana, of who? Of Rabban Gamliel. That Esreg Achar Likitosoi Isuroi Kiyarak, that as far as determining what year, what Meiser Sheni, Meiser Ani. Here it follows the rules of the vegetable regarding the assignment of when did you pick it, when did you take it off this tree. He's suggesting for these rules, Rosh Hashana Shaloi should be Tishrei. Wow. Now I'm going to speak it at the end again. We learned on Amud Aleph today. It's all about the rainwaters and the sap. I'm going to repeat something very important at the end. Okay, that's his Havamim. And the Gemara says, not only we're not refuting it al pi Sfara, we're refuting it from a Tana. The Gemara says it's not true. Meisvei. Listen to this Braisa. Rabban Rebbe Shimon ben Elazar Ayman. Likoid Esrei. Guys, listen to this. If you pick the Esrei, Erev Tu B'Shvat, when, like we learned before, this idea of once you have a date, it's until the edge, until the sunset. This Esrei. And then V'chazer V'likit Mishitavei Hashemesh. Now, when we learned about this example on Echad B'Tishrei, we had to speak out that really it never happened because Echad B'Tishrei is Yom Tov and you're not allowed to pick fruits off the tree. But here it's the Poyal Mamish. There's no Isur Malacha on Tu B'Shvat. What's Tu B'Shvat today? We don't say Tachnun. That if you pick it off the one off the tree before sunset and one after sunset, since Tu B'Shvat is the Rosh Hashana, and based on the rule that we may not separate Trumos or Maisros from the different years, one on the other, even if it's from the first year to the second year, even if it's all the same Trumos or Maisros, even if it's a Maise Truma, Maise Rishon, Maise Sheni, doesn't matter. It's from the old year and the new year. Because there is a rule that's consistent, that's everywhere. Now, I can just stop over here. You can already see the raya over here. The raya is that this Tana that speaks about picking, likate, it doesn't say that if the Chanota happened before Tu B'Shvat, the Chanota after Tu B'Shvat. This Tana speaks about picking. Now, obviously, this Tana is following the Shita of Rabban Gamliel. And yet, it's Tu B'Shvat, the Rosh Hashana, not Echad B'Tishrei. But let's finish reading the Braisa. Now there's an example. Hoysa Shlishis Nichneses Levis. This Braisa is really a continuation from the Braisa that we had before. The Braisa began from the second to the third. Now we're going another case from the third to the fourth. Why do we have to change examples? The Gemara is going to ask that tomorrow. But if you were in the third year, again, guys, here the third year doesn't end Echad B'Tishrei. If we are focusing on the fruits for the dinim of Maisris, and Tu B'Shvat is the Rosh Hashana, which means that if before Tezvav B'Shvat you were in the third year, after Tezvav Tu B'Shvat you were entered now the fourth year. So those esroigim that you picked, not that had chanata, that you were malake before Tu B'Shvat, okay, it's the third year, and therefore Meiser Rishon or Meiser Ani. The same tree, you picked it off the tree a second later. It was after Shkia or Bazoi. It's from the fourth year. Yes, you have to separate Meiser Rishon. It's not only you don't separate Trumas from Meiseres from a Chadash Aliyah from a Chadash, but the actual Meiser designation changed because it's Meiser Rishon. The fourth year you go back to Meiser Shem. End of quote. Top of Taf Tezvav. So Zok the Gemara, man shamat leido azabas alekita. This Bryce is not speaking about Chanata. Obviously, it's not Rabbi Eliezer. This Tana has to be Rabban Gamliel. And what year concerning Maisres? It's about Maisres. The Rosh Hashana is not Echad B'Tishrei, the way we had the suggestion of Rabba Barafuna, Vikatani Shvat. So sometimes we refuted him. This is such a big question, he never said it. We misunderstood what he said. He said the opposite. He wouldn't have not known this. That Amar Rabba Barafuna, the third line from down the top of the Amid, Daf Tezvav, that Afal Gav the Amar Rabban Gamliel, not like Rabbi Eliezer, that Esrik Achar Likito Kiyarok. Don't confuse by saying, if it's like a vegetable, then it's Rosh Hashana is the same date like a vegetables. Don't say that. Rosh Hashana Shaloi is Shvat. Nervous then, did you pick it before Shvat? Let's go with Basilo. Did you pick it before Tu B'Shvat? Did you pick it after Tu B'Shvat? I just want to conclude today by saying the following. What we learned today is that the logic of Shvat has to do with the rainwaters, not with the seasons. And it has to do with the sap. That since the sap of the tree is ready to give forth fruit by Shvat, and the rains fell prior to Shvat, the Rosh Hashanah is on Shvat, so it's from the rains of last year. So then you assign it to the last year. So what was even now when it comes to picking the vegetable, it should go by the fruit is coming from the tree. The tree is giving the fruit because of the sap. So how can Rabban Gamliel B'chlal connect it to picking it? And the answer is, this is important, that the esrig is unique. Not only does it grow off the sap, it also grows off the current rainwaters. And the logic that we had today on Amud Aleph regarding vegetables, Kirab Yisraglili, Kirab Akiva, it was generally the same, my benayu, the difference, but it's about, it constantly needs irrigation. Again, esreg is hadar be'ilan mishana l'shana, including it also develops from rainwater. So you have the rain that goes through the tree, and there's a holy slapshus. Going back to what we said yesterday about the rain and about the land, that rain is already representative of the higher worlds. It's like there is the higher level of the neshama that doesn't go into every Eved b'meyuchad. It gives life to everything all the same. The oir hasoiviv of God, of godliness in the world. And then you have the mamali. There's something that goes through a system. It's mislabish on one level. So that level of rainwater that has to be mislabish in the tree and into the sap, that happened before. That has to do with chanata. Once there is the sap, the sap doesn't need the additional rainwater. It doesn't primarily need it. It doesn't. It can do it. It probably benefits it a little bit. It's not significant. But there is another level of chayis that an esrig gets. Also, something unique about an esrig, that it constantly gets a chayis directly from the rain. Direct. Above ishtalshalus. Mamish. Maybe that's another reason why esrig is considered such a beautiful fruit. Chevra, God willing to be continued. We have one more exciting daf on Zeroyim. And then sadly, we finish Zeroyim temporarily. And daf Tezayin, we're going to come full back to Rosh Hashana topics.
Very
Very good.
Rabbi. Oh,
Yeah.
Good then.
I was going to say, did you explain the whole Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel potential versus actual as it relates to Shvat, Rosh Chodesh versus?
Because the sap is what the tree needs to be able to produce fruits. The actual chanata happens on Tu B'Shvat. As a rule, now there are exceptions. So if we only need the potential by Echad B'Shvat, the potential is there, the sap is there.
Got it. Okay.
If we need to also have a little bit of the actual, most times it begins on Tu B'Shvat. It doesn't begin on Echad, the actual emerging of.
Got it.
Yeah, Yaakov.
Well, I become familiar with Beis Shammai, B'makom, Beis Hillel, Mishnah, and I don't think I copped when we learned the story of the basketball inside that rule was because of that incident. That's what you're saying?
No, I for some reason I can't hear you clearly. No, Hamo.
Hold on one second.
Is this better?
Go ahead.
Rabbi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I've become familiar with the rule, Beis Shammai, B'makom, Beis Hillel, Eino Mishnah.
That's after the basketball. That's after the basketball.
I don't think I hopped when we learned the story of the basketball inside that it was because of that incident. So, can you just remind me, did the basketball explicitly say that this is like that? Did the basketball explicitly say this, or did we like extrapolate from the ruling
onwards? From then onwards, after the basketball said Allah Beis Hillel, then we don't have the option of saying if you want to follow. That's the way most of the Shainim explained that the Brisa that we learned today was before the basketball.
But I mean, was the basketball poskening in that case, and then we extrapolated?
Yeah, the basketball made a statement. There was such a split. There were so many topics that we were arguing with that if we wouldn't have put a very clear psak, then there would have been two Torahs.
I don't want to take up everyone else's time.
What's bothering? We have another few minutes. What's the issue here?
We would have had two Torahs on that issue.
No, on all issues. On all issues, it was too much. They were arguing too much.
They were bringing in all these
other things. It was much worse today than the Machaber and the Ramah. It was like everything. They had different dates, they had different everything. So the Baskal says, "Good enough." And we pass like Beis Hillel.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi.